we pray that the God of peace and love would come into South Africa and bring understanding and reconciliation, that there might be love in this land.
Global Vision presents the TV news magazine of Southern Africa.
The Protection of Information Act threatens journalists with jail.
It's got nothing to do with government policy. It's got nothing to do with apartheid or anything like that.
Because it is important that people know what is happening.
South Africa Now. This week reporting these stories. Nelson is still here in this hospital outside Cape Town. He will not be going back to prison, but will not be freed. What does it mean?
When he gets out of the clinic, he'll be going to more comfortable an environment. It's just, it's not what the people of South Africa are demanding.
Other prisoners have been freed, and the Sharpeville Six have won a reprieve from the hangman. We'll have the details.
Next, from South Africa, a week wasn't enough, so for one more special day, the excitement continues. Join Pat Robertson as he speaks from his heart to the people of South Africa.
Meanwhile, American evangelist Pat Robertson goes live from South Africa. You'll see part of his interview with P.W. Botha. And you'll also meet a local clergyman, Bayers Naude, the anti-apartheid Afrikaner who might have been prime minister. In our culture section, workers as performers, creativity at the grassroots. These stories and more on South Africa Now with your host, Fana Kekana.
Realoja. Political prisoners released and others reprieved from the hangman. There has been a flurry of developments regarding political prisoners. First, there was word that the Sharpeville Six will not be executed. Then the announcement that Nelson Mandela will not be going back to prison after he recovers from tuberculosis. And finally, word that two very sick and aging black political leaders were released. What do these developments mean? Nelson Mandela is still in this clinic outside Cape Town, where he's been visited in the past by his wife Winnie and is said to be recovering. Joining us to discuss Pretoria's decision and what happens next is Themba Ntinga, a spokesman from the African National Congress.
We believe that Nelson Mandela has to be released. Nelson Mandela has to be released unconditionally. Now, for Botha, for instance, to be talking of moving Nelson from the clinic, and when he gets out of the clinic, he'll be going to more comfortable an environment. It's just, it's not what the people of South Africa are demanding. The people of South Africa are demanding that all the leaders be released, and a process of trying to resolve the problem of South Africa entered into.
There have been various press reports positioning Botha as a moderating force inside South Africa. Do his recent moves indicate a real change towards majority rule, or is this an attempt to appease the international community?
It is intended to appease the international community, yes. There's no sincerity in what Botha is doing. I mean, sincerity is the scrapping of apartheid altogether. That's the only sincere thing anybody can do in South Africa right now. Now, for Botha to be going around Africa, going to meet with other people in Africa, and not meeting with Nelson Mandela and the rightful leaders of the people is just a waste of time.
Ailing political prisoners, 69-year-old Harry Gwala, an African National Congress member and a trade union leader, and Zephania Mothopeng, the 75-year-old founder of the Pan Africanist Congress, were released. Both cases had been the subjects of international appeals on humanitarian grounds. Mr. Gwala, who is suffering from an incurable disorder, lost the function of his arms and hands. Mr. Mothopeng is also ill. Recently, we spoke with Mr. Mothopeng's son before his father's release.
What the government wanted to do, they wanted to give him a paper to sign relinquishing violence, and his question is, how could it be said he's perpetrating violence when the government, in his opinion, is the very one who's responsible for so many killings, so many arrests, so many jails? So who's actually the person who's conducting violence?
Last year, South Africa executed 164 people, compared to 25 in the United States, a country with 10 times the population. 269 are currently on death row. 10 of them just won a reprieve from State President Botha. The most famous are the Sharpeville Six, whose appeal for clemency won support from political leaders worldwide.
I, with so many others in this country and in other countries, have been part of a campaign to get the state president to exercise clemency and reprieve the Sharpeville Six, and so I'm thrilled more than words can say.
These are the men and the woman known as the Sharpeville Six. They were convicted under the so-called common purpose statute for being part of a mob that killed a municipal official. There was no evidence that they directly participated in the murder. Nevertheless, they will now serve 15 to 25-year prison sentences. Relatives of the Sharpeville Six reacted.
She said she's happy about the sentence. Really, it's too long, but it's better than be executed.
4 white policemen who were convicted of directly murdering blacks had their death sentences commuted too. They too have received long sentences. The anti-apartheid movement sees the reprieve of the Six as a victory, a response to pressure. Although State President P.W. Botha, who was misidentified as foreign minister, denies it.
And it is not as a result of pressure being applied from outside, because then I would have done it months ago. I am not the type of person who will be pressured into a situation which I don't want to go into.
Botha's comments were in response to questions from American evangelist Pat Robertson, whose 700 Club spent Thanksgiving week broadcasting from South Africa.
Has there been discrimination? Of course. Have people been brutalized? Yes. There's no question about it. Have there been unfair laws? Yes, there have been unfair laws. Has there been oppression throughout this continent? The word is yes. But how do we solve it? Do we spend our time looking back at oppression and hatred? Do we look back in the United States of America?
The South African government has reaffirmed its support for Jonas Savimbi's UNITA movement in Angola. To date, the Angolan government has refused to negotiate with Savimbi, branding him a tool of South Africa. An official South African Broadcasting Corporation report continues to speak of US and South African backing for Savimbi.
Peace can only be restored in Angola if the Marxist MPLA government agrees to accommodate this man. UNITA leader Jonas Savimbi has warned repeatedly that although he has not been directly involved in the peace talks between South Africa, Angola and Cuba, there can be no peace in the region until his movement is given a say in government. UNITA has been receiving support and supplies from both South Africa and the United States, and the South African government signaled its continuing support for UNITA through a meeting between President P.W. Botha and Dr. Savimbi in Pretoria, the day South Africa announced its acceptance of the timetable for Cuban withdrawal.
You are watching South Africa Now, the world's only weekly program featuring news, background reports, and cultural segments from Southern Africa.
South Africa is usually presented as simply a black-white issue, but it is more than that. There are many white South Africans who support black majority rule. The man you are about to meet, Bayers Naude, is one of them. Here's a profile of Bayers Naude from the film The Cry of Reason, directed by Robert Bilheimer.
If man, through his greed and his fear and his prejudice, creates customs and laws and systems which further that injustice.
The trust Bayers Naude has earned from his countrymen, especially the blacks, who represent the vast majority of South Africa's population, is based on his long-standing and prophetic opposition to apartheid.
To define apartheid, I would wish to say that it is a legalized form of racial discrimination as found nowhere else in the world. Blacks are totally excluded by the new constitution, so that they have no direct say of any kind in the political decision-making process of their own country. Now that is a recipe for revolution. And we've said so. And we have said very clearly to the government, this can only lead to further confrontation and bloodshed. And in actual fact, this is what is happening in our country today.
Here we have a man who transcends racial and color barriers, a man who's managed to find his place into the hearts of many blacks, young and old, and a man who has earned trust from the black people in the time, or the times when it was almost impossible for blacks to trust any white person.
If we had been asked at a time when, say, Bayers was 20, what do you think he is going to be? We would not have been able to predict that this man was going to end up being the kind of political force he had become.
Bayers Naude grew up far removed from the suffering of South Africa's blacks. A theology student at all-white Stellenbosch University, he was following in his father's footsteps as preacher and keeper of the Afrikaner faith. Rising quickly through the ranks of the Dutch Reformed Church, Bayers Naude and his wife Ilse looked forward to a life of service to the Afrikaner people. He became the youngest member ever to join the Broederbond, the secret Afrikaner society that conceived and to this day manipulates white supremacy in South Africa.
I believed in apartheid for many years, that it was just, that it was fair, that it was reasonable, and that it would solve the problems of human relations, of people of widely divergent cultures, until a moment came in my life when I realized that it was impossible.
The dawning of truth did not occur until Bayers Naude was in his 40s and on his way to becoming one of the most powerful whites in South Africa. Prompted by fellow churchmen who were in daily contact with blacks, Bayers Naude began to open himself to a South Africa he had never before seen.
21st of March 1960, Sharpeville occurred. 69 people, part of a massive crowd, who had protested peacefully against the pass law, were shot and killed. Most of them in the back, from the side. The event of Sharpeville created a massive outcry. I remember so well when that day I drove into Johannesburg and I saw the posters, I said to myself, there is no way in which I can remain in hiding any longer with regard to my deep moral concern of what was happening in the country. And I came to the conclusion that if I wanted to retain my integrity as a human being and as a Christian, I had to state clearly, unequivocally, and fearlessly whom I believed in, what I believed, and why I believed. And that I did.
In 1963, Bayers Naude formally severed his ties with the Broederbond and the White Dutch Reformed Church. His farewell sermon, delivered to a congregation of the most powerful whites in South Africa, was entitled Obedience to God.
The battle lines were being drawn between us and the government, not because we wanted to fight with the government, not because we wanted to provoke the government, but because we said very clearly, on the basis of our understanding of the Christian faith, of the biblical concept of justice, of the siding with the poor and the oppressed, we have no option but at least attempt to be obedient to the demands of the gospel. And if that obedience to God creates a situation of disobedience to the state, we had no option but to be obedient to the higher authority.
Bayers Naude, high on the list of enemies of the regime, was banned for 7 years.
A banned person becomes a non-person. He is simply removed from the public eye, the public ear, and the public voice.
In June 1987, Bayers Naude retired from his position as General Secretary of the South African Council of Churches. Like other passages in his life, this one marked a new stage in his long pilgrimage as a true South African.
Every day that I live becomes to me more meaningful, more fulfilled, and for me, much more enriching. I'm eager when I go to bed at night to awake the next morning and to say, it's a new day, it's a new life, it's a new experience of God and of humankind.
Next week, our cultural segment takes an exclusive look at the Amnesty Tour in Africa. We have footage of what happened when some of the biggest rock stars played in Southern Africa.
Get up, stand up for your rights. Get up, stand up, don't give up the fight. Prison man, don't tell me heaven is under the earth.
In the past weeks, we brought you stories about some of South Africa's cultural superstars. But culture is not just for celebrities. It's embedded in the lives of working people. Our cultural segment comes from Afrovision, a report on worker culture.
Disenfranchised in their own country and rendered virtually voiceless through the state control of most media, black South Africans have had to rely on alternative forms of expression. Drawing on their own traditional culture and transforming it to express the conditions of their harsh existence under apartheid rule, a people's culture has emerged, distinct from and a challenge to the dominant culture. Over the past decade, the emergence of a powerful trade union movement has provided the organizational base for one form of this indigenous culture. The trade unions term it working class culture.
I think working class culture is the expression of the most exploited people about how they see themselves, how they see their situation. And in a way, they're beginning to make images about themselves which contradicts the usual images of workers which we see in the dominant culture.
One of the strongest influences in this organizationally rooted form of cultural expression has been traditional praise poetry. Adapted to inform and inspire the shop floor workers, this basic narrative form now has popular urban roots.
Ihlathela imnyama labona ngabaqashi balibalekela imvukuzane eyabona zimpipi zabaqashi iza kancane ngomgwaqo iphikelele ngasezibonini sagijima zatshela abaqashi zathi basi thina bukile lo mvukuzane buya no side no factory yathina wakhala umqashi wathi hey my boy what is emvukuzane? It's one of Fosatu's union.
In South Africa, tribal divisions are artificially reinforced by the migrant labor system and the government, and cultural expression carefully controlled to reinforce basic stereotypes.
I like the fact it's an expression of the natural culture of these tribes, and it's sort of seeing the African as an unspoiled person instead of being Europeanized.
I like it. I like the beat. The beat.
You like the beat?
Yeah.
It's the best free entertainment you can get in the world.
But the new working class culture, as defined by the trade union movement, is anything but voyeuristic. Instead, it is sought to examine serious political questions, both at the workplace and in the communities.
Nanokuthi kufunakala kubonakale indlela ukuthi saphuma kanjani. Sakubona ukuchitha isikhathi ukuthi saka ama sticker nama pamphlet.
One of the most devastating issues within the trade union movement has been the rise of right-wing vigilante groups.
Abantu abaningi njengoba sebe join ama vigilante hayi ngoba bethanda abanye bajoiniswa ngenkane ngokuthi futhi uhlele endlini unike umshiza kuthiwa aphuma kuhambe yoshaya abantu ungazi ukuthi abantu uyokwenzana nabo kulapho okwenza khona abantu kuze bona bathi amabutho amaningi mhlambe mabili mathathu ukubona abamabutho kodwa iningi labo abantu abangathanda ukuyoshaya basi.
In an improvised theatre, these workers attempted to act out some of their own experiences and concerns.
Siyithola inkinga ngoba lento le asikhulumi ngento mhlambe engekho nje ngathi khuluma into eyenzekayo. So angayasikwazi ngengikwazi ukubeka kakhulu ukuthi yini sesa inkinga sesahlangabezana nayo. Kodwa into esibona la ukuthi ya inkinga yona into esingase sibe nayo. Yabona abantu bona abama vigilante most of them ba my neighbors yabo and bazi ukuthi si amalungu enhlangano njengoba ukhosat lab and ube bazameke ukus attack ngalo ndlela ukuthi samalungu elokhosat khosat kodwa bebengakho awe ukuthi sekhona into enjengalena edlala ekhuluma ngabo.
But the informal theatre that has swept through the trade union movement has had a light-hearted touch, as this play by workers from the British-owned Samcoal company shows.
Politics and economics is one and the same thing. I told you that before. Each time we talk about democracy and reform in South Africa, I suffer. That is your part. You are part of it. What is this bullshit? What is this Commonwealth pressure against South Africa? Do you know what it means to my Samcoal? It means I must close down in 6 months. Maggie, is that why I made you Prime Minister of Britain? Maggie, you are getting soft to make it, damn it. You are getting soft to finish.
While the state of emergency restrictions imposed by the government since June 1986 have further curtailed overt political expression inside the country, indigenous cultural expression continues to develop as an authentic voice of the dispossessed.
Ultimately, what we are struggling for in our organizations and in culture is a much deeper understanding of democracy, deeper understanding of what it means to be human.
Thank you for watching South Africa Now. Transcripts are now available for $3. If you want an educational resource list or to share your comments, send a stamped self-addressed envelope to South Africa Now, 361 West Broadway, New York, New York, 10013. South Africa Now is produced in association with the Africa Fund.